will start the webinar. Good evening and welcome to one and all, and welcome to Dr. Krishna Sarin, our speaker of the day. And this is from the webinar series, Bengaluru Fights Corona, from Nammo Bengaluru Foundation. This is the fourth series that we have of the webinar that is happening on Bengaluru Fights Corona and on the health and the COVID-related issues. A brief about Nammo Bengaluru Foundation. We are a non-profit organization with an aim to be champions of change for a better Bengaluru. I think many of you have been working with us very closely as citizen volunteers as well as representatives of various RWS and apartment federation. NBF strives to be the voice of the city and those who relentlessly fight towards making the city more livable, inclusive, and responsibly governed. Our mission includes also building and fostering enriching partnerships with individuals and institutions to create a sustainable and impactful improvement in the city. Given that the city has become a dream destination for the citizens from all over the country in IT, engineering, business, industry, education, healthcare, etc., we wish to champion the cause of every citizen in making Nammo Bengaluru a world-class city for its residents. We welcome all of you to support us and follow us and share your thoughts and ideas with Nammo Bengaluru Foundation, and please follow us on our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter handles. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Krishna Sarin from the Specialist Hospital, Kalyan Nagar. Dr. Krishna Sarin MS is a working consultant and interventional cardiologist at the Specialist Hospital, Kalyan Nagar. Dr. Krishna Sarin completed his MBBS and DM from JIPMER and has worked as an interventional cardiologist at Aster Medicity, Cochin, and also Fortis before joining Specialist Hospital. He has specialized in preventive cardiology intervention for structural heart diseases, coronary diseases, peripheral and structural intervention, permanent pacemaker, and implantation of ASAD. We will have Dr. Krishna speaking about how COVID-19 can affect your heart. We will have the doctor make his opening remarks, and then we will open the floor to questions and have a Q&A session with all of you. I request all of you to type your questions in the chat box and raise your hands, and we will come to you for your query. Welcome, doctor, and thank you all for coming and joining us. And also thank you, doctor, for taking your time off to attend our webinar today.
Yeah.
Dr. Krishna Sarin, please. Yes.
Yeah. Am I audible? Am I audible clearly?
Yes, doctor.
Okay.
Yes, doctor. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, Mr. Vinod.
Thank you.
I'm happy to have this opportunity to interact with you all. Thank you for the NBF Foundation. I'll just put a PowerPoint which I prepared just as an aid to help me speak. I'll share the screen.
Yes.
At any point, if you think it is too exhaustive or over the top, you can stop me and we can have the questions.
Sure, doctor. Can I request all of you to switch on your video, please, since it's the beginning of the webinar, till doctor gets his presentation on sharing. Yeah, welcome all.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, but not yet, doctor. Yes.
Now it is visible?
Yes, doctor.
You are seeing the full screen, is it?
No, doctor, we can only see the header.
Not yet, sorry. What about now? Is it visible now?
Yes. Only the header, doctor.
Only reads COVID and the heart.
Yeah. I'm on it. 1 second. Let me sort this out. I'll do it once more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it visible now?
Yes, yes. Yeah, now we are on the indirect effects.
Yeah, you are seeing the text below also, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
text
yes.
below also. Yes, yes.
Okay. So, briefly about COVID. We all know about how COVID uh, affects the lungs. So, COVID is primarily a lung disease. It causes a severe pneumonia. So, how does it affect the heart? So, the lungs and heart are intimately connected. So, I'll just put in a some problem with my.
Yeah.
I think I'll present like this because
Okay.
Not a
the
problem.
other one it is not moving. The slides are not moving.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so it is primarily a lung disease. So how does it affect the heart? So if you look at the lung, the connection between the lung and the heart, there is the right heart here, and the right heart gets blood from all over the body. It pumps into the lungs, and from the lungs, the blood collects oxygen and comes into the left heart. So the lungs act as a bridge. It is a bridge between the right heart and the left heart. So now what happens when there is a severe lung disease? Because at both ends of the lungs, the right heart and left heart are there, and it is only natural that the heart gets affected. So when the lungs are infected, the right heart finds it very hard to pump blood into the lungs, and because the lungs are affected, the oxygen gathering does not happen very smoothly, and the blood that comes back to the heart has less oxygen. So we know all the effects of low oxygen content in the blood. All the organs in the body depend on oxygen for their survival. The same with heart. So when the oxygen content that comes back into the heart is less, the heart starts pumping less blood. The pumping function is affected, and that is how the heart gets affected in COVID. So this is about the indirect effects of COVID, and there are some other indirect effects like stress cardiomyopathy. Like when we know that the COVID is a very stressful situation, the entire body is affected, multiple organs are affected, and there is a lot of hormones, noradrenaline, adrenaline, stress hormones, cytokines. It is called a cytokine storm. So a lot of changes happen in the body, and all this toxic hormone cocktail in the body affects the heart, and that causes a stress cardiomyopathy. The ultimate effect of all this low oxygen content of the blood and stress cardiomyopathy, everything is that the heart pumping goes down. The normal pumping is around 55 to 60%, what you call as the ejection fraction, the pumping function of the heart. And that goes down to say 40% or 30% or sometimes even lower. So once the heart pumping goes down, it is something like a double hit. The lungs are affected. The lungs do not gather oxygen properly, and the heart does not pump properly. So when the lungs and the heart both get affected, then it is just a matter of time when all the other organs get affected sequentially, and a multi-organ dysfunction sets in. So there are some direct effects also. Direct effects include heart attack. We all know that it is well proven that COVID causes heart attack because COVID is a thromboinflammatory condition. What you call as COVID causes clots. Unlike the other usual influenza or flu, it causes clots. So these clots can happen anywhere. So if the clots happen in the arteries supplying the heart, it causes a heart attack. If the clot happens in the artery supplying the brain, it causes a stroke. And sometimes clot can happen in the large veins in the legs. So these veins go directly to the heart and from the right heart into the lungs. So these clots can travel and block the arteries to the lungs. So similar to what you call as a heart attack, this can be called as a lung attack or a venous thromboembolism. So heart attack, lung attack, stroke, everything is possible with COVID. Even during the acute phase when the patient is admitted, sometimes in the ICU, or sometimes it can happen even at home. In the recovery phase, after up to 2 to 3 weeks after recovery from COVID, these heart attacks and lung attacks can happen. And there are some other direct effects like myocarditis and pericarditis. These are all medical terms. So these are the effects wherein the virus affects the heart directly. So the virus affects the muscle of the heart. It causes a condition called myocarditis or inflammation of the heart muscle. Sometimes it causes a inflammation of the covering of the heart. That time it is called as pericarditis or covering of the heart. Sometimes some fluid can accumulate all around the heart. Myocarditis can cause the pumping function to go down. And these are all direct effects of COVID. Not only direct effects of COVID, sometimes the immune reaction of the body. The body reacts to the virus. Body tries to fight off the virus. That immune reaction can affect the heart, and that is why these are sometimes late effects. Sometimes persons have recovered from COVID, they are all hale and hearty, but after 2 to 3 weeks they start developing these problems. So these are all the effects of the immune response to the virus. So these are all the direct effects, and very rightly, early recognition is the key. So indirect effects usually happen when there is extensive lung involvement. The lungs are extensively damaged, the pneumonia is ongoing, there is low oxygen content in the blood, and the heart gets affected. But most of these indirect effects are very well reversible, because once the pneumonia gets cured, the stress comes down, then the heart starts pumping better. The right heart finds it easier to pump, the left heart gets more oxygen, so the pumping function improves. So those indirect effects are more or less completely reversible. But in case of direct effects, like if you get a heart attack due to COVID, or if you get a lung attack due to COVID, venous thromboembolism happens. All these effects, the recovery will depend on how early you reach the hospital. Early recognition is the primary objective. So when you get a heart attack, when you start having chest pain, that is the exact point of time when the blockage has happened. So within 1 hour, the golden hour is the first 1 hour. So within 1 hour, if you reach the hospital, and within up to 12 hours, if you are able to open the block, then the recovery of the heart muscle is almost complete. But suppose you wait at home, you think it is gastritis, you are afraid to come to the hospital because there are COVID patients there, and you wait till late, and then you come to the hospital, then there is much less that we can do. The damage may sometimes be permanent. Even if we open the block beyond 12 hours, the damage may be sometimes permanent. So early recognition is the mainstay of treatment. Similarly, with lung attack, if you have a blood clot in the leg, before it goes to the heart and before it goes to the lungs, if you start on blood thinners, anticoagulation, then you can prevent the progression of the clot. You can prevent a lung attack. And in case of myocarditis, the inflammation of the heart and the pumping going down, you can start medicines for heart failure. And the earlier you start the medicines for heart failure, the decline in pumping function can so far be prevented. And it is likely to improve over the next 3 to 6 weeks. So in all the cases of direct effects due to clots, heart attack, lung attack, myocarditis, it is essential that you recognize it early and start treatment early. So for recognizing it early, you should be very aware of the what all are the important symptoms of a major heart attack. So we all know it is chest pain. Chest pain is usually central chest. It is like a pressure or a squeezing kind of chest pain. Usually when doctor asks you to describe the pain, you may close your fist like this. That is the kind of pain that you have. It's kind of a squeezing kind of pain, or a heaviness, or like a weight placed on your chest. and it can radiate anywhere, sometimes to the left hand, sometimes to the jaw. You may feel short of breath, and sometimes the pain can even go to the exact backside, just opposite the between the shoulder blades. You can have pain. So these are all symptoms of a blockage causing a heart attack. And sometimes, what are the symptoms of a deep vein thrombosis? Deep vein thrombosis is what I told you, the thrombosis or clots in the leg veins. So swelling in single leg. On one side, you have a swelling, leg is unusually swollen compared to the right side, or some discoloration, some redness, some pain, some tenderness. So these are all symptoms of a clot in the leg. And when the clot travels to the lungs and causes a lung attack or a thromboembolism, pulmonary thromboembolism, you may suddenly have severe breathlessness, unexplained breathlessness. While you are sitting itself, you suddenly feel breathless. Your heart rate goes very fast, and you may feel lightheaded. Your BP goes down. All these are symptoms of a lung attack or a thromboembolism. So all this heart attack and the pulmonary embolism and the clot formation, everything, if recognized early, can be treated very easily. So there has been a lot of incident. We have been reading in the newspaper about lot of sudden deaths happening during COVID, in the hospital, as well as in the early recovery period after COVID. So how do you prevent these sudden deaths? Why do these sudden deaths happen? Sudden deaths are most likely, all these sudden deaths are due to a cardiac event, meaning a rhythm disturbance. The heart suddenly starts pumping very fast, pumping very irregular, or the heart pumping is not efficient. That time, the patient may suddenly collapse and they may die. So why does the heart suddenly become arrhythmic, or why do these rhythm disturbances occur? It is mainly because of all the direct effects that I just discussed: clot formation, heart attack, or a pulmonary embolism causing low BP, and all those things. So how do you avoid this sudden deaths? Mainly, it is by being very watchful for any new symptoms and getting early medical attention. So for that, you should be aware of the symptoms which I just discussed. And it is very important to avoid heavy exertion. Even if you have seemingly recovered from COVID, you should avoid heavy exertion. Because when you are at rest, you had a pneumonia and you have recovered completely, you feel fine, your oxygen saturation by pulse oximeter is 97, 98. But still, when you start walking or when you start exercising, when you go to the bathroom and come back, you will notice that the saturation may fall. So many a times what happens is, people feel okay, and then they start exercising too much in the early 2 to 3 weeks after COVID recovery. So that time the hypoxia happens, or the low oxygen saturation happens when you start walking or exerting. At that time, that low oxygen saturation can affect the heart and can suddenly cause a collapse. And sometimes doctor may prescribe you a blood thinner based on your D-dimer level, because COVID causes clots. D-dimer is a value which we usually check to find out whether you have that propensity to form clots. So sometimes we find that in the first 3 to 4 weeks after recovery from COVID, the D-dimer is persistently elevated. In such cases, you may need to take a blood thinner to prevent clot formation even after recovery from COVID. So that may prevent all these undue effects. And it is very important that suppose you have an underlying cardiac issue, you must continue most of the other cardiac medicines while you are taking treatment for COVID. So it is not that you have COVID, you stop all your cardiac medicines and then start taking medicines only for COVID. So that is also another reason. So if you have had a stent, or if you had a bypass, if your heart pumping is low, it is all the more important that you continue taking your cardiac medicines according to your doctor's prescription, and along with that, take the medicines for COVID. So these are all some of the things that we can do to prevent all these sudden deaths in the recovery period after COVID. And regarding vaccination, we all know all the vaccines have been extensively used in India. Sputnik, Covishield and Covaxin, all are safe. There is no difference with respect to the cardiac safety. And there is no real difference in efficiency. Most of them are 70 to 80% effective. And the benefit is much, much more than the risk. So many a times we have a doubt whether cardiac patients can take the vaccine. Cardiac patients should take the vaccine because they are at a higher risk of developing severe COVID. If they get COVID, there is a likelihood that they may have severe forms of COVID. So they should take the vaccine. And whether they should stop medicines, usually no. Most of the medicines, cardiac medicines, can be continued, especially the blood thinners like aspirin, clopidogrel, and ticagrelor. Those blood thinners which we usually prescribe after a angioplasty or a bypass surgery, you should continue. Some blood thinners like acetylene or warfarin, these blood thinners are given after valve replacement surgery. Those are stronger blood thinners. In such cases, you should consult your doctor, check that PTINR level and make sure that it is not very high. It should be around 2.5 to 3, then it is okay to take the vaccine. Even while taking the medicines, you can, even on the day of vaccination, you can continue to take the medicine. There is no problem. Unless the INR is too high, like 3.5 or 4, then you should wait for 1 or 2 days, get it down, and then take the vaccine. And vaccination, all said and done, vaccine is an inactivated virus. What we have in our country, both the Covaxin is a completely inactivated dead virus, and Covishield is a inactivated virus. It's not a dead virus. So some effects of the vaccine may mimic a mild COVID infection. So that is why when the body, after vaccination, you get a small fever, some headache, which usually gets better in 2 to 3 days. And similar to the effects of COVID on the heart, very, very rarely vaccines can cause some myocarditis or clot formation. Very, very rarely. And you can see the incidence is only 1 out of 2 lakh doses. If you give 2 lakh people the vaccine, only 1 person can have such side effects related to the heart because of the vaccine. So you should be mindful of all the symptoms that I just discussed. Those symptoms are possible in the first 3 to 4 weeks after vaccination also, though it is very, very rare. And if at all you develop any such symptoms, it is very well treatable if you come to hospital early. So you should be mindful for any new cardiac symptoms in the first 3 to 4 weeks after vaccination also. And regarding preventing third wave, vaccination is the first tool, and SMS has become the new normal. Sanitize your hands frequently, wear a mask, and always maintain social distancing. And avoid the 3 C's. Closed spaces. Earlier, during the first wave, our emphasis was mainly on fomite transmission, or this sanitizing the hands and not touching where a patient would have touched. So now the recent studies have come out with the fact that kind of transmission, like the patient has touched somewhere and you touch there and then you transmit the virus to yourself, that kind of transmission is somewhat rare. Most often the transmission occurs by close contact with an infected person. So sanitizing hands, wearing mask, everything is okay, but social distancing is the most important, and you should avoid closed spaces, crowded places you should avoid, and close contact with diseased persons you should avoid. So with this, I will just wind it up. We'll open for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. Yeah, that was very interesting, and a lot of information that you have actually given us. I think the most important being the golden hour, and also early recognition. If somebody is actually suffering from pain or any other discomfort, it's better to reach the hospital immediately. I think that's really great. And also to continue the medicines, not to stop the medicines during the COVID times, as well as in terms of this thing. And of course, vaccination is the key. And I think as a country, I think we are doing very well, and we have really scaled it up. And most of them, I think, of the population have got their first doses. And I think we are expecting most of them to be getting their second doses also. So I think now we'll open up for questions. I think Mr. Anil, can we unmute Anil and please? I think he raised his hand. He had a question. Anil? Mr. Anil?
Yeah, he's unmute.
Can you also switch on your video, please, everybody? So that, we can actually see who's speaking and we can converse with you.
I'm outside.
No problem, Anil. Please go ahead.
Thank you for this useful information, Doctor. My question is on the heterologous prime and booster strategy of the vaccine. I mean to say, there were some studies done in Spain or in the European country that they used one dose of Johnson & Johnson, another dose of Moderna or Pfizer, and they have done it successfully. And I believe in India also they are doing it for Covishield and Covaxin. What is your take on in this strategy? I mean, has it been successful or is it still under process? I mean, still under research? And is it going to affect from the cardiologist point of view? What is your take on?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So in India, we do not have a properly conducted study yet. ICMR has recently come out with a data on 18 patients who inadvertently got 2 different vaccines. It was not intentional. So initially, first dose was Covishield or Covaxin, and the second dose was something else. And it was a mistake on part of the medical personnel who administered. But anyway, they didn't have any problem. They took them and studied, and it was found that their immune response was more robust. The 2 different vaccines actually caused a better immune response than the same vaccine 2 doses. So it is too early to say with respect to Covishield and Covaxin, but overall it has been done abroad mainly because of constraints, the dosing constraints. Here also we do have dosing constraints because many people with Covaxin and Sputnik, there has been a situation where they are waiting for their second dose. The second dose doesn't become very easily available. But unless we have properly conducted studies, it is difficult to comment. But overall, it is likely to be more effective.
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Can we have Vinita Kaul, please? She has raised her hand. Can we unmute Vinita?
Yes.
Hi, Vinita.
Hi, good evening, Doctor. The question I had is, if a person is taking blood thinner and is neuro affected, but he's okay, but he's a bedridden person, can he take vaccine?
Yeah. So he can take the vaccine. With respect to the blood thinners, there is no problem in taking the vaccine. What blood thinner he is on? Do you have a specific blood thinner in mind, or?
No, I don't have.
So it is possibly, what I think is, it is possibly to prevent DVT, because he is bedridden, and to prevent a DVT, meaning a deep vein thrombosis, he is given a blood thinner. Possibly that is the scenario. In that case, you can give. There is no problem in giving.
Okay, and Doctor, he had a brain surgery. He met with an accident. Okay. And a very major accident, and he had lost his senses, but he's recovering. He's fine now, but he's not able to go out because he has not been vaccinated, and that is really depressing him, because he's fine, he's in his senses, but his the physical condition of his body is, if he doesn't get up from the bed, right, he's bedridden, he needs to get up. So but we are not able to take him out is because he hasn't vaccinated himself.
Yeah, I don't see any problem in getting him vaccinated because even if he's on a blood thinner, the needle that we use for vaccination is a very small needle. You would have seen that needle.
Yes.
It is unlikely to cause any hematoma unless it directly goes and punctures some blood vessel. It is very, very rare to cause a hematoma with that needle. So if at all taking blood thinner is a concern, after like usual vaccination, they don't even recommend pressing the site. So after the vaccination, they just remove it. You need not even keep it pressed because there is virtually no chance of developing a hematoma there or a muscle bleeding there. So if at all you are concerned with respect to the blood thinner, what you can do is for 5 minutes, light pressure at that place you can give after the vaccination. With respect to the taking blood thinners, there is no contraindication. You can give. No
Okay,
problem.
and Dr. Bedridden, he's a bedridden patient, so that is also fine.
It is fine. Yeah, meaning when we talk about in the medical intervention, we always talk about benefits versus risks. So there is no medical intervention that is 100% safe. Even the usual paracetamol that you take for headache has its side effects.
True.
Because it is so very, very rare, we do not talk about it. It is the same with vaccine. So as I told, the incidence of a side effect happening is only 1 out of 2 lakh doses. So that is a very negligible side effect. Similar to you go out on the road and you by some misfortune you get involved in an accident. It is like that. So he should get vaccinated. I think.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, doctor. Thank you, Vinita. Can we unmute Guru Raja Rao, please? I think he's raising his hand. Yeah, I can see him.
Sir, can you please unmute yourself?
Sir, you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Guru Raja speaking, sir.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sarin. The good lecture I have seen. I just wanted to know only one thing, sir. You are not. What are the precautions to be taken for a diabetic patient, sir? Diabetic, highly diabetic, or this one because I am highly diabetic, and it is for everyone to know regarding diabetic patients. What are the precautions to be taken, sir? Thank you, sir.
You are asking about precautions with respect to vaccination or precautions with respect to COVID?
No, vaccination is okay, sir. How about the diabetic patients? What are the precautions they have to take, sir?
Yeah, so diabetic patients, as such, there is it is a spectrum. You cannot classify all diabetics into one group. Suppose you have a long-standing diabetic, like more than 10 years, 15 years, you are on insulin, then your risk of severe COVID infection becomes small. Suppose you are a mild diabetic, well controlled on 1 or 2 medicines, and your HbA1c. HbA1c is the 3-month average that we usually do. So your HbA1c is mostly around between 7 to 8, never more than 8. Then your diabetes is reasonably well controlled. In that case, the risk of you having a serious COVID infection is much lesser.
So, see, I am a diabetic patient for last 20 years. I am on insulin plus tablets.
Okay.
As of now, I'm telling you that this condition may be for so many people who are listening to this.
Correct.
So then I am just asking, I'm also on tablets also, like Vidagliptin and all these things.
Okay.
So, my diabetes is under control.
Okay.
I just wanted to know because I am almost for 20 years, sir.
Yeah. So there are no specific precautions specific to diabetics. These precautions are same for everybody. Precautions in the sense the usual sanitizing, masking, keeping a social distance. All these are same for everybody. And regarding vaccination, you should take the vaccine as soon as possible. If you completed the vaccination.
Yeah, I have completed the vaccine, and I thank you very much, sir. I got all the messages you have given me, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can we unmute Mr. Narayan, please? D1 Narayan, it says. Sir, can you come on video?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please go ahead with the questions.
You're able to see me? Yeah.
Yes.
No, D1 is my house number, of course.
Yes,
Okay.
sir, yeah.
In fact, first of all, thank you very much for organizing this particular thing. And I think a lot of people are getting benefited with these question and answers. Everybody has got their own different conditions, and everybody's situation is different. I would like to thank definitely Vinod and Dr. Sarin and Usha for this. I had posted 2 questions. One question is, regarding any breathing exercise that actually the doctor recommends. So that because this is related to the lungs, I'm sure in Indian medical system also we have pranayam and other things. Any breathing exercise the doctor prescribes so that it can be prevented or it can be postponed. Okay, we may not be able to prevent all 735 crore people in the world are going to get, that's what I hear, either in mild dose or maybe it will be in heavy dose, but everybody is going to get, and everybody is going to possibly get antibodies developed as well. But then can we prevent this with some breathing exercises? That is my first question. And another question is, now people are talking about the booster dose. Of course, US also is planning that, but then they said, okay, first let us complete 2 doses and then we'll think about the booster dose. Now, because immunity, people say, is temporary, it is not going to be permanent. Maybe after 1 year, we require again booster or whatever it is. So those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for this question. So your first question regarding the pranayam and other yoga-related breathing exercises. So there is a concept called cardiorespiratory reserve. So cardiorespiratory reserve is your the ability of the heart, cardio, and respiratory ability of the lung to withstand a stress. So your cardiorespiratory reserve will determine how well you recover from COVID. It is not, you cannot maybe by practicing pranayama you may not be able to prevent COVID, because COVID, it is a viral infection. It is a minute particle. As such, with exercises you may not be able to prevent the infection, but if at all you get the infection, definitely your cardiorespiratory reserve will determine how bad you will be affected or how well you recover from the infection. So all these exercises, pranayama, all the breathing exercises and Indian systems of medicine will definitely improve the lung capacity, the diaphragmatic strength, the respiratory muscle strength of the chest muscle strength, and it will definitely help in improving the reserve. So if you have been practicing pranayama for years together, then there is nothing like it. So your cardiorespiratory reserve is likely to be very good, and you are likely to survive COVID in a much better fashion. And prevention as such, I am not sure. It may not really help, but your recovery, it will definitely help. Second thing is, second question was regarding the booster dose. So right now we don't have any concrete recommendation from the government of India or ICMR with respect to the booster dose. Possibly they are, like you said, they are waiting to complete the first 2 doses for the Indian population. But a likely scenario will be if any new mutants or variants emerge, like this Delta variant, which is now circulating everywhere. So the Delta variant, definitely the immunity generated by the current vaccines, because all the current vaccines which are being used were based on the initial variants before the second wave started happening. Based on the first wave and the variants which were circulating at that time, the vaccines were prepared. So these vaccines may prevent severe Delta infection and mortality, but definitely they do not have as much of an effect in preventing Delta variant infection. You may still get the infection, but you may not die of Delta variant. So as the Delta variant becomes more prevalent, it is likely that we may need a booster which incorporates the proteins from the Delta variant also. So it is likely that we may need a booster dose later, but as of now there is no recommendation. As new variants emerge, we may need a booster dose. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Can we unmute Sangamesh, please? I think he's raised his hand. Mr. Sangamesh?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good, Sangamesh. Yeah, good evening.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, sir. So my question is, in case of COVID heart attack, so for early detection, you mentioned ECG and echo. is one of this is good enough, or both are mandatory?
So this will depend on what you mean by heart attack, because when non-medical people say that a heart attack has happened, it means either of two things. One is they have severe chest pain, and that acute situation that they describe their symptomatology as a heart attack.
Okay.
Second thing is the effect of COVID, direct effect of COVID as a myocarditis, or the inflammation of the heart muscle pumping going down, and this causing a predominantly breathing difficulty rather than a chest pain. So both the effect of a heart attack as well as myocarditis are ultimately to reduce the heart pumping. So the pumping comes down from 60% to 40% or so, and then it affects the lungs, because the heart collects the blood from the lungs and then the heart pumps it to all parts of the body. So when the heart is not pumping enough, there will be a back pressure on the lungs, because the heart is not pumping forward. So there will be too much of blood which remains in the heart, and that causes a back pressure in the lungs, and the lungs get filled with water, and that is how you get breathless.
No.
So it depends on what exactly you mean by a heart attack. So it can be due to a clot. The clot in the artery causing a blockage, that causing the muscle damage, and it can be due to a myocarditis or direct inflammation of the heart causing the pumping to go down. Both can happen very acutely. So heart attack, when you say it happens within hours, myocarditis as a myocarditis causing heart failure or low pumping can happen over days. Maybe within 1 or 2 days it can develop. So it can also resemble a heart attack. Did I answer your question? What was your question again?
Yeah, I mean, one of my friends, he was diagnosed with, he had COVID positive, and then he was asked to get his ECG because he was having a chest pain also after the recovery period, during the recovery period. So his ECG was normal and echo was normal. His chest pain was still there. So he was asked to undergo the treadmill test. So there they found it was failing, and he had some blockage. So he was not very sure it is the blockage was because of COVID or it was because of something else. But ECG and
both were known.
Not good enough. So
yeah, it can happen with blockages, because the blockages, when we say in the heart, the blockages are cholesterol deposits. So these cholesterol deposits usually happen over time, sometimes over months. But a clot due to the COVID, it happens suddenly within hours. So there may be a blockage which is 30%, 40%, slowly progressing, 50, 60, 70. Even with 70 or 80% blockage, you may not feel much symptoms when you are actually sitting and resting. But when a clot forms on top of that 70% blockage and makes it 90% or 99% or 100%, then you start having symptoms when you are at rest. Then you start getting pain at rest. So you have to have a differentiation between a blockage, just a blockage, and a clot which causes a sudden increase in the percentage of blockage. So that clot causing the sudden increase in the percentage of blockage is what we call as a heart attack. It is an acute situation. Blockage you can wait. Blockage you can detect only by treadmill, because you may not have resting ECG you are doing while the patient is lying down. It may not pick up a blockage. Echo you are doing when the patient is just lying down without any effort. You may not pick up a blockage. For detecting just 70% or 80% blockage, you need a treadmill test. But a heart attack, a clot suddenly causing slow blood flow in the heart, that you can easily pick up by ECG. Because the pain will be, at that time the patient will have pain or some symptoms will be there. So that you can detect by ECG or echo.
Thank you, Doctor. I think Sangamesh's question is answered and in very much in detail. Thank you. I think we will go to Mr. Partho Paul, who has raised his hand. Can we unmute him, please? Yeah. Mr. Paul,
Good
please go ahead
evening.
with the question.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So it's like this, so that first of all, it's a very wonderful presentation, very educative. My two queries are actually not pertaining to prevention. Equally important is the treatment and the cure. What we have found is that post-COVID, a number of deaths that have taken place because of the treatment. And what I would like to mention here is basically the steroids. The steroids are a very essential part of treatment, but at the same time, for very elderly and aged people, they are invariably affecting the vital organs. And post-COVID, there are numerous deaths which have taken place. Now, with 2 years of experience of whatever has gone past, have the Medical Association been able to standardize these treatments for the various age groups? Something about 50, below 50, above 50, super senior citizens, because it's invariably the senior citizens who are affected by this treatment. And if it's only a standard treatment of a standard dose of steroids that is being given, the chances of recovery for these people are very, very bleak. I lost my mother in the last 2 months back. She had tested negative after COVID, after almost 20 days. But within a week of her testing negative, it led to kidney malfunction, fluid retention, and ultimately she passed away. So this is my very genuine question, that as a society, as in the country, as a nation, and with so much of experienced medical people who learned it, we should be in a position to standardize different types of treatments as far as age group is concerned. Secondly, all these deaths which are post-COVID, they are invariably mentioned as, whether it's a respiratory failure or a cardiac arrest or whatever it is. But the basic criteria was that they had reached a state post-COVID which led to the cardiac failure or the respiratory failure. As we as an association, are we taking cognizance of this statistically so that we know exactly what exactly is the amount of damage or how much have we suffered in this?
Yeah, regarding the steroids, there is, as of now, there is no age-related standardization with respect to the steroid dosing. Steroids are usually prescribed according to the severity of the lung infection. So in whatever age, the CORAD score, the CT severity score that they give a score out of 40. So suppose if it is more than 13 or so, you are classified as severe COVID, and then you start using steroids and other stronger medicines for the COVID part. So the dosing of steroids is purely based on the severity of the lung infection. There is no standardization with respect to the age, because it could be a coincidence that older people have more severe lung infection and they are prescribed more doses of steroids. And it is usually not, we may not be able to pinpoint steroids as the cause, but it is possible that steroids have their negative effects more in the older people, and we may in the future need to standardize the doses and maybe bring it down. That is true. With respect to the second question, the post-COVID deaths, I'm not sure about whether NBF has taken into account of all those things. But what we can say is there are a lot of post-COVID deaths which are related to the heart, which are related to the cardiac events. So whenever we see a post-COVID relatively recovering, okay kind of person dying suddenly at home, usually it is a cardiac event, and it may be due to multiple factors. Multiple factors in the sense they are one of the things is they are on multiple medicines, and the interactions between medicines are possible. Cardiac medicines and their own medicines for COVID, that is possible. Second thing is electrolyte disturbances. Their electrolyte meaning sodium, potassium, and this especially potassium, it is a very critical electrolyte, the fluctuations of which can easily affect the heart. So at home, even if they are at home, their diet may not be proper. They may be getting frequent nebulization. So nebulization can sometimes affect the potassium. So once they are discharged home, we do not check it very frequently or aggressively. And a lot of possibly during the second wave, a lot of discharges would have happened slightly earlier than we could have afforded otherwise. In a normal situation, when the hospitals are not very full, we could have kept them in the hospital for slightly longer time and observed them and cared for them. But that was not the situation in the second wave. So many of them would have gotten discharged a little earlier than good for our comfort. And that would have also caused all these mishaps. It is a cocktail of multiple things would have happened.
While the other related diseases, which is attributed in the death certificate, like hypertension, diabetes, but nowhere is it mentioned post-COVID.
Right. That is
my point is that that is what we are trying to say is that even if you don't classify it as a post-COVID thing, your statistical data, you're able to analyze certain trends which are happening. That will not be accurate. That will not get affected by your system.
I agree, completely agree. But there is we all know about all the excess deaths that have been coming in all the states. The excess deaths have been by a factor of 1.5 to up to 7. In West Bengal, it was almost like 7 times. So all these deaths are not, possibly all are after COVID, but are not classified as COVID. That happens.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Paul, and thank you, Doctor. Coming out with the same question like that, I have a question in the chat box from Aishi Singh, and she's asking that it is said to avoid any surgery unless it is important post-COVID, doctor, and how long should one wait, and does general anesthesia post-COVID affects the heart? 2 questions in one, basically on surgery. If it's not an important surgery, whether you need to wait post-COVID, and how long should one wait? And again, that depends, I think, very easily, as you rightly said, on the emergency of the situation. And does general anesthesia post-COVID affects the heart?
Yeah, so there is, it will usually depend on how bad you were affected by COVID. So suppose your lungs were affected very much, because the post-COVID or long COVID symptoms we are just starting to understand how it happens and how long the lung takes to recover. So we have seen people with severe COVID discharged from the hospital, but having very, very prolonged periods of hypoxia, meaning their oxygen saturation remains on the lower side. They feel breathless, even with a little amount of walking, they feel breathless, and they have a persistent cough, and that persists for almost like 1 to 2 months. So that situation means that their lung capacity is not adequate. The lungs have not recovered completely. So COVID is different from influenza or flu in that matter, that once you get flu, usually the recovery is very complete. But COVID does not behave like that. Once you have a severe affliction, COVID has been found to cause fibrosis in the lungs. So it damages the lungs in a somewhat irreparable kind of way. In many cases, when severe COVID has happened, it happens. So in that case, the risk for anesthesia and risk for surgery will go up. Because if you are giving a general anesthesia, you have to put in a tube, and your lung capacity should be adequate for the ventilation to happen. And for easy extubation, meaning after the surgery, the tube has to come out and you have to breathe on your own. And all these things will depend on what I told you, the cardiorespiratory reserve. So once you get affected by COVID and your lungs are damaged, your cardiorespiratory reserve may be subdued for quite prolonged period of time. And in that case, it may be prudent to defer a non-essential surgery. If it is an emergency surgery, of course, you have to go ahead. But it may be, after recovery from an episode of severe COVID with severe pneumonia, it may be prudent to wait at least 2 to 3 months for undergoing a second surgery or a procedure. Minor surgeries are, I mean, of course, there is no problem, like a dental extraction or a skin biopsy or small surgeries are okay. Major surgeries which require general anesthesia, it may be okay to withhold for some time.
Thank you, doctor. I think yeah, that was really good of you to actually tell about a post-COVID recovery and how much months is required. I think 2-3 months, as you rightly pointed out, is key for one to recover and then get into surgery. I think again, Mr. Narayan has a question. Can we unmute him, please? Anybody else has a question? Can you please raise your hand so that we can unmute you? Can we unmute Narayan, please?
Mr. Narayan has to unmute himself. I've already unmuted him.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Narayan,
Okay, yeah.
please go ahead.
Sorry. No, I had one question which is scaling the previous one. Below certain age, actually, the vaccination is not done, and they say actually it's okay for them actually not to have vaccination, particularly the school-going children. But it's quite likely that they could be asymptomatic and they could be actually spreading to others in the family, maybe the seniors, maybe the grandparents, etc. Now, I don't know how really this can be handled. Any suggestions for this? Because school-going children, they may not be showing any symptoms for that matter, and there is no vaccination for them, unfortunately. So what is your suggestion on this?
Yeah, it is true. So when we look at vaccination, we are actually looking at individual protection. You are you on an individual basis. That is why we started the vaccination from 60 plus first, the most, then 45 plus comorbidities, and then it came down to 18 plus. So the stand of the government is that the most risky in the sense those who are most risky to die of COVID, not the risk of infection. Of course, children are more likely to get the infection because of their interactions and their lack of social distancing and all those things. That is true. But they are much less likely to die of COVID. So that is why they were kept at the last. Those who were likely, if at all they get COVID, they are most likely to die. Who are most likely to die? More than 60 years. So that is why they were given preference. But of course, your point is very valid. But as you know, suppose even if the school-going children, somebody gets affected and they come back home with the infection, suppose the elders are all vaccinated, then we are in a relatively good position. So that is what the government is trying to achieve. You vaccinate all the elderly, and after that, even if the children come home with the infection, you are relatively protected. But studies are ongoing. Now Covaxin, there is one trial which they have recruited school-going children up to 18 years of age, and they are conducting a study. Possibly once the results come out, it may be approved for them also.
Yeah. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, doctor, for that. I think we. Does anybody has any other questions?
Yeah, we have Pragya who's asked a question.
Okay.
Doesn't
Pragya, please go ahead, please. Yeah, go ahead with the question, Usha.
Yeah, doesn't antiviral or antifungal medication affect the heart?
They have an effect on the heart. If you are thinking about the mucormycosis and the treatment is mostly amphotericin and itraconazole and all those things. So they have a effect on the heart, and the cardiotoxicity is well known. You have to. Did you have any experience in any such cases?
Yeah, can we unmute? Yeah.
Pragya, you can. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Good evening.
Yeah.
Yes, doctor. I had experience with my father and a couple of other volunteers also who got mucormycosis, and Yes, we know that fluid accumulation in the lungs happens after the surgery and all, but how much it can be avoided if in case mucor happens, somebody get infected, and does antiviral and antifungal treatment affects the heart in long run or not?
Usually long-term effects are not much. Usually in the acute situation, many of these antifungal medicines have a propensity to cause arrhythmias, rhythm disturbances. So if you are maintaining your potassium and other electrolytes well, and you do not add any additional medicines which increases their toxic effects, no. So for example, initially when we started treatment for COVID, hydroxychloroquine was all the rage. HCQS, everybody was prescribing HCQS. Now it is out of the guidelines. So HCQS, hydroxychloroquine, had a effect on the arrhythmias. It used to cause cardiac arrhythmia. So after HCQS, people, there have been reports that they had the arrhythmias and death. So similar to that, these antifungal medicines, some of them have a propensity to cause arrhythmias. And if you take care of the drug combinations and maintain your electrolyte milieu well, usually it is not, because arrhythmic risk is only when during the time of administration. It does not happen 1 or 2 days after. And with respect to the cardiac dysfunction, amphotericin sometimes cause a reversible kind of cardiomyopathy or myocarditis it can cause. But usually it is reversible. It is not a major long-term issue.
Okay. We have a question from Ms. Sarbani. What is the effect of steroid on heart and lungs?
Yeah, usually no. Usually there is no specific effects to tell about. Sometimes what we have noticed is patients who are on, especially taking injectable steroids, their heart rate may be a little low. We have noticed that the heart rate sometimes becomes in the 40s or 50s, and people are concerned. But usually once you stop the steroids, it improves. Steroids as such are, when you say safe, many people are skeptical, but actually they are relatively safe medicines if administered for short periods of time. Unless if steroids are administered for long term, like for weeks together, then definitely it has an effect on the glucose metabolism. Your sugars may shoot up very high, your pressures may go up, all those effects are there. But short periods of time, as we use for COVID, for 1 week or at the most 2 weeks, usually they do not have much effect on the heart.
Yeah, thank you, doctor. I think we have one more question from Ms. Gayatri. Yeah, can we take Gayatri? 1 or 2 questions more, doctor, if you have the time? Doctor, can we take 2 more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Ms. Gayatri, can we unmute Ms. Gayatri? Ms. Gayatri, please unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself.
Yes, good evening, sir. It was wonderful presentation as well as good suggestions, sir. I'm having one question related to post-COVID. Actually, one of my friend, am I audible?
Yes, sure.
One of my friend, she undergone this COVID in December. Okay, after that, after 6 months, 7 months, she's getting eczema, outer eczema in her eyes, both eyes. She has not taken any such steroid or anything, but she's suffering. What it is, because of what it may be? Can you give any suggestion for this? Because she never got such things before COVID, and she suffered a lot in COVID. Second wave, it may be.
Yeah.
Please suggest.
Unlikely that it may be. It is related to the COVID infection as such. Without seeing the what exactly the lesion is, it may be very difficult to comment. But I think it could not be related to.
Doctor has told it is a post-COVID effect only.
I am not sure.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, without seeing the patient. Thank you, doctor. I think. Can we unmute Ms. Sridevi Reddy, please? Yeah. Hi, Sridevi. You can unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself, Sridevi.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, this third wave is going to affect kids now. So, what is the symptoms and what is how dangerous is the Delta virus for the kids, like children, and for the newborn babies? How you are going to take precautions for them? Just explain a few words.
Yeah. So the infectivity of Delta wave is proven to be stronger than all the other variants, because the R0 means the one person affected with COVID infecting how many other people before it dies down. So the R0 is much more than the usual variants. The infectivity, meaning the transmissibility from one person to another person, the strength of transmission is much more. But it is not from studies from abroad have not shown any increase in the mortality in case of children. So the mortality in children or the risk of severe COVID in children, even with Delta variant, is less or similar to what the other variants were. So in that way, it is okay. There is no problem. How to protect them is again a problem, because now I do not know what the decision of the government will be. Whether children with in lower classes, now they have opened for, I think in the higher classes they are planning to open. So in lower classes, I don't know whether they will open up before they get vaccinated or after. Anyway, we don't have any vaccines as of now available. The studies have yet to come. So it is a tricky situation, but overall I think though they may get infected, they are going to recover soon. It is very, very rare that children will have severe forms of COVID infection. That is true.
So whether you are suggesting for opening schools is good or bad, just suggest, are you suggesting for government? I'm asking, sir.
Yeah.
Whether it is good or bad for kids.
Difficult to say. There are experts over there, so they will take care, I think.
Yes. No, they need to do a study. Thank you, Sridevi. I think that's also very the thing. I think the doctor.
I think we'll have to live with COVID for a long time. There is, how long will you keep children at home? It is not practically possible. We'll have to live with, because Israel, if you look at the data of Israel, they had completely vaccinated their population even while the second wave was raging in India, and now in Israel the cases are going up. So even vaccination is not a complete solution. You will have to live with COVID for maybe another 1 or 2 years more before herd immunity takes over and we are relatively protected. So I don't think, from my part at least, I don't think we cannot keep children at home for long.
Yeah. Thank you, Sridevi. Thank you, doctor. I think we'll go to Mamta now. Mamta has raised her hand. Can we unmute Mamta, please? Miss Mamta.
Mamta, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. This is a general question I would like to ask. Use of mask by adults in the gym, like because the gyms have opened and like in precaution of anticipating third wave, which doesn't happen. So do adults need to use masks in gym, and also children when they are playing outdoors? The use of masks.
Outdoors, I do not think so, unless you are likely to come in contact with another person. I mean, it is all that distance from an infected person that matters. So outdoors, usually the risk of infection is very, very less. Outdoors, as of now, we have a mandate. We have to use masks, but overall, it may not be a major issue. But gyms, I think, it may be better to still use a mask because it is a relatively closed space, and the risk of transmission in that environment is very high. So I think.
Okay, but what about, when they are breathing heavily? Sometimes the virus float, they say that cloud virus or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, that risk is always there. Okay. So the risk of transmission is maximum when all the 3 C's that I showed in my presentation, all the 3 C's come together. Right. So when it is a closed space and it is crowded and 2 people are in close contact, that is when the risk of transmission is the highest. So
but it is still better to wear a mask.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
I think that was really nice. I think masks are here to stay. I think we all need to protect ourselves and our families, and especially as Dr. has rightly pointed out, ventilation is the key. If you are able to open the gym and ventilate and work out in the open, it is even better. I think most of the gyms are also taking away the ACs and making it more ventilated and open space. I think Raghu has raised his hand. Can we unmute Raghu, please? Mr. Raghu?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes. Please go.
All right. Question is very general. See, we have been talking about second wave, third wave, and so on. Whether this is the effect of social behavior or it is mutation of the virus itself. So what I mean is it the effect of irresponsible society or the effect of the virus itself?
It is a combination of both, I would say. Yeah. It's a combination of both, because the new variants or new mutants arise when the infection is rampant. So many people getting affected at the same time, because the virus mutants arise by a process of natural selection. So if there are many people infected, the virus count is also that much higher. So out of that large pool of so many infected persons, one variant emerging and becoming the dominant strain is much more. So that is why early vaccination and the responsible behavior from people is the key to prevent the emergence of new mutants. It's a combination of both.
I see. So one aids the other, basically. Our irresponsibility helps virus to spread fast.
Correct.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Doctor, one last question, if you don't mind. There's Mr. Som who has asked you what exactly you meant by low pumping of the heart. Does this show up in BP?
No, not necessarily. It is a measure which you assess by echo, by doing a scan of the heart. Okay. So pumping is that percentage which I showed you, 60%. 60% means out of 100 ml blood that comes into the heart, with every beat, 60 ml is pumped out. That is what it means. So 60% is the normal pumping. Some blood remains in the heart, 60% of the blood is pumped out. So when it becomes 40% or 30%, only that much. Out of 100, only 30 ml is pumped out. The rest of the 70 ml remains within the heart. That is what I mean by the pumping percentage. It doesn't show up in BP. Although when there is a very severe pumping deficiency, like the ejection fraction becomes 20% or 10% or so, then usually the BP also will drop. But usually BP is not a measure of the pumping function.
Okay. Doctor, I have a last question to ask you. How do you differentiate a chest pain due to gastric problem or due to a heart attack? See, I lost my cousin last month and it was due to blockages and he had an attack. He assumed that to be a gastric problem and for 4 hours he has suffered. And finally, when he decided there was something wrong with him and he was coming to specialist, he passed away. So definitely the doubt arises in one's mind. How do you differentiate between a gastric chest pain or a heart attack pain?
So it is mostly situational.
Okay.
You usually over the years, you will have a inkling, like when you are having acidity, like after some specific foods or after having some heavy spicy non-veg, or
Yes.
some foods, some relation, and you will usually that correlation will always be there.
That is what happened to him, you know. He had non-veg, and within 1 or 2 hours time, he started having that pain and burning sensation, and he assumed it to be gastric.
Okay.
It
But
was too late by the time we brought him to the hospital. He passed away.
Okay.
So I was just wondering, how, in the
Yeah.
early stages, how do you...
So if it is exclusively gastric, usually you associate with the foods that you take, and you usually the usual remedies, home remedies, some antacids you take and wait for it to settle. Suppose it doesn't do that, doesn't settle, then there is something fishy.
Wrong.
The second thing is any associated symptoms with gastritis, like you are feeling tired, or any radiation, like the pain going to the hand or in the jaw, or any pain in the back. All these pains are usually, acidity pain will usually be localized within the central chest or the epigastrium. So anywhere else it happens, then it is a. Then another thing is sweating. Sweating is a very common when there is a heart attack. You feel a cold sweat.
Okay.
Like, without any reason, you are sitting relaxed without any exertion. Still, you feel slightly clammy, slightly sweaty. That is a
Type of
indication that it is something problem.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the information, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. I think we'll end with Usha's question. I think Doctor has really spent time. It's 8:20.
Yeah.
And thank you, Doctor, for your time and in such short notice that you've been able to really join us. Though last week you had to head off to Kerala, but still you came back and kept up your commitment. We really thank you. And that was a very informative and, of course, a very educative session, I think, for everybody here. And I think let's all stay healthy and stay safe. And as you rightly pointed out, let's avoid the 3 C's, you know, and also SMS, so that we wear our masks and social distance, and also, you know, keep our hands in good hygiene. Thank you, Doctor, very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for your very informative session. And I hope everybody has really got a lot of information that they desired from this webinar. And this is a series of webinar, Bangalore Fights Corona, and we'll have more and more doctors joining us. Please join us, and also please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you.
Vinod, you can tell them about tomorrow's webinar also.
Tomorrow also, I think there was somebody who was asked about child. Tomorrow, a child specialist, a pediatrician is joining us. So please do join us tomorrow also, so that you can at least, you know, ask him questions for all the children, and especially the school-going children below the 16 years, and how you know, you can take care of the children, because the vaccine is not yet out for them. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Krishna, for joining us. Thank you.